Thanks very much, David, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Really looking to build on a presentation we gave at the in-person TechKnow conference a couple of months ago. We've had some really good progress since then, which I'm going to try and provide a quick update on here. But also, this presentation is to serve as a bit of an introduction for those who are new to the story. So if I can jump ahead 2 slides, please. We're building really on the theme of the previous presentation about cancer, but obviously we're a therapeutics company rather than a diagnostics company. And we're specifically working on a drug called HMBD-002, as David touched on in his introduction. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we think this is an exciting opportunity, why we think it's distinguished from other drugs in the cancer space. But I do want to highlight right up front a couple of key points about this. And perhaps the most important is that this is a relatively late stage asset. This drug has completed phase 1 human testing, and that work has been done in the United States under the oversight of the US FDA. So we're really at the point in the development of a drug where things get exciting, where we're really looking for definitive signals of efficacy. And we'll talk a little bit in a moment or two about how we plan to do that. So again, if I could jump ahead 1 slide, really want to try and just orientate things a little bit by talking about immuno-oncology, which is the field that we inhabit. And immuno-oncology is something that's really come into being over the last couple of decades. I would say, in all honesty, it is perhaps one of the most exciting developments in medicine of the 21st century. And the premise is this: for a tumor to become established, it has to switch off the immune system around it. It has to suppress the immune system so that it can take root. Without that, the immune system will clear out tumor cells just in the same way that it clears out bacteria and viruses in normal everyday life. So we have a whole host of technologies that work by either reactivating or by augmenting the immune system. And you can see some of those illustrated on the right hand of this slide: cancer vaccines, CAR T and CAR NK technologies, companies like Therapeutics, but also this field called checkpoint inhibitors. And broadly speaking, what we're trying to do with checkpoint inhibitors is to switch the immune system back on. It's to cancel out this negative signal from the tumor, switch the immune system back on, let the body's own defenses deal with the tumor. Next slide, please. And this is a little bit detailed, but I just want to give you a little bit more context here. So there are already a number of drugs which do this. This isn't just a thought bubble. This is an important category of cancer drugs. Most of the existing drugs target a protein on the surface of cells called PD-1. And those drugs, together with one other drug targeting another molecule called CTLA-4, in aggregate represent about $40 billion of sales. The 800-pound gorilla in the field is a drug called Keytruda, also known as pembrolizumab. That alone is $25 billion plus of sales. But people have been looking for the next big thing after PD-1. And one of the most exciting targets is something called VISTA. That's what we target. You can see at the bottom of the left-hand panel of the slide, HMBD-002. It is a VISTA inhibitor. And that is how we're trying to reactivate the immune system. Of interest, there's another Australian company working in this space targeting another novel checkpoint inhibitor called LAG3. That company is Imutep, and really encourage people to follow their journey. They're a couple of years ahead of us, but gives a sense of what the development of one of these drugs can look like. Next slide, please. Now, other people have tried to approach VISTA. So you might ask, well, why are we advantaged? What have we got that nobody else has got? And very, very broadly speaking, the answer is safety. Most of the other drugs that other companies have tried to take into human testing to inhibit VISTA have been quite toxic drugs. Now, we've got a different approach. Our drug is of a different type than the others. It is called an IgG4 antibody. I won't bore everybody with going into what that means, but all the other drugs that have been tried in human patients have been IgG1 antibodies. Theoretically, we would expect an IgG4 antibody to be much safer, and in practice, that turns out to be absolutely the case. So we do have, in principle, a drug that is not only best in class, but also first in class. It is the most advanced of all the drugs in the world inhibiting this target. Next slide, please. And when I say that it is the most advanced, as I mentioned earlier, we have completed phase one human testing in the United States. We'll talk a bit more about that data in a moment. But we've also made huge progress with things like learning how to manufacture this drug and with all the supportive work, all the animal toxicology data, and all those sort of things that agencies like FDA require. So, what is ahead of us now is phase two human trials. And that is always, for almost any drug, where the rubber hits the road. That is where we're looking for definitive signals of efficacy. That's, of course, the thing that excites investors, it excites potential partners, excites regulatory agencies. And we're going to be starting phase two human trials next year, 2026. Next slide, please. So I want to talk just briefly about our phase one study, and this study was conducted at 6 cancer centers in the United States, and they were some of the top cancer centers in the world, centers like MD Anderson, Stanford University, Yale, Cedars-Sinai, and so on. It was a large study, 48 patients. 28 of them just had our drug by itself, but also 20 of them had it in combination with Keytruda, pembrolizumab, the drug I mentioned earlier. We wanted to understand at a very early stage what the safety profile looked like in combination. Now, phase one studies are always safety studies. We are primarily looking to answer the question, is the drug safe? And this drug is extremely safe. We saw very, very few toxicities at all with this drug. It is, in my experience, almost uniquely safe for a cancer drug. And that's fantastic news because that makes us very, very confident about putting it into patients and combining it with other drugs. But if we go to the next slide, please, we also saw some indications of efficacy here. Now, as I say, phase one studies are safety studies. They're not designed to really give us an efficacy signal. But as you can see here, about a little more than 1/4 of the patients had what we call stable disease. That is to say that for extended periods of time, their cancer did not get worse. We slowed it down. And just to be clear, very, very few medicines are in the business of curing cancer. Sadly, the way we do that, even now, is mainly through surgery and radiation therapy. But if we can slow cancer down, if we can make it more amenable to treatment by other modalities, that is huge progress. And as you can see here, we had quite a number of patients in this study showing that. And if we go to the next slide, I can contextualize this a little bit by comparing it to a number of other approved cancer therapies. So you see in the left-hand bar there, our results from our phase one study. And then the remaining 5 bars, you can see just a selection, almost a random selection of 5 approved cancer therapies. Each of these have been billion-dollar products. That is to say, they've generated over $1 billion in annual sales. And as you can see, their results at phase one look very similar to ours. So obviously, individual mileage varies between cancer drugs, but we feel like our data is very consistent with what we would expect to see for a potentially successful cancer drug at this stage in development. Next slide, please. And finally, we did see a number of patients with really, really interesting results that gave us a lot of encouragement that our drug is moving the needle. And you can see a few of these individual patients here. You can see also here just a sense of how advanced and how late stage these patients were. They'd all been dealing with cancer for 2, 3, 4 years or more. They'd all had and failed multiple previous lines of therapy. So these were patients who, sad to say, were very, very much at the very end of their disease. But nevertheless, we saw in many of these cases shrinkage of the tumor. And by the way, tumors don't usually shrink by themselves. So when we see a tumor getting smaller, we get interested because that usually shows our drug is doing something. And we also saw these patients staying on treatment for extended periods of time. These would typically be patients whose life expectancy would be measured in months. And as you can see, we had some of these patients on drug, stable disease, not getting any worse for 6, even 12 months at a time. So certainly some very encouraging data coming out of this phase one study. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do next? Well, I won't go through all the detail here, but just to summarize, we've got what we think is a very, very innovative approach to phase two. And the broad goal is the one you see at the top of this slide, to minimize time and cost and risk. We recognize that we can't do this kind of study in the way that Pfizer or Lilly or GSK would. We don't have infinite budgets and hundreds of people. So we've taken a very innovative approach, which we think should give us a faster, cheaper readout that we can then use to pitch the drug. So on the next slide, you get one sense of this. This is going to be a study that looks at multiple different tumor types in parallel. So instead of putting all our eggs in one basket and saying we're going to just look at thyroid cancer or just look at gastric cancer, we have the ability to look at multiple tumor types in parallel. That gives us multiple shots on goal, but it also lets us, to some extent, cut our suit according to our cloth. So depending on our resources, our financial wherewithal, and so on, we can start different arms of the study at different times. As each one gets a readout, we can report that, but we can customize our study to some extent according to what looks most interesting and according to, frankly, what we can afford to do. Next slide, please. Each arm of the study will be modular. And what that means is that instead of just recruiting 500 patients and coming out 3 years later and telling you whether the drug works or not, we'll recruit patients in stages. And that way, if we see that one of these arms looks much more promising than the other, we can focus our resources on that. If another one of them looks less exciting, we can dial that one down. So it gives us an ability to calibrate our investment according to where the data looks most promising. And it also gives us a much greater density of readouts. Each stage of this will give us an ability to come and talk to investors and partners about what we're doing. And so we think this kind of modular approach gives us a really nice way to sort of almost get a real-time readout on how our drug's doing. Next slide, please. So just to wrap things up, what are the particular cancer types we're looking at here? 4 priorities that we've identified at the moment: triple-negative breast cancer, the most aggressive and most treatment-resistant form of breast cancer, a particular form of lung cancer, esophageal cancer, and endometrial cancer. And we didn't just pick these out at random. These are particular cancer types where there is at least a theoretical reason to believe that our drug may be particularly efficacious. But there are also ones where we think we can relatively easily and cost effectively run a clinical study, and where we think there is a substantial commercial opportunity. So we've tried to solve for both scientific and commercial considerations right up front. And next slide, please, which is my last one. What does this translate to for us as a company? A lot of detail here, but just to really boil it down, I think there's a lot of news flow coming through in the next year or so. You can see some of the indicative milestones we think we're going to be talking about next year and the year after and the year after, and some indication of where the time frame starts to look like for us to really get maximum engagement with potential partners and eventually with regulatory agencies like FDA. So we're on a journey. We're at the beginning of it, but I think it's an exciting journey ahead, and I think there'll be a lot happening in 2026 for our company. So really look forward to sharing that journey with everybody as we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Great presentation. I'll lead with probably the most obvious, because the big blue box in the middle of the screen. Can you discuss partnering interest from major pharmaceutical companies? What does it look like, and when do they get engaged?
David, it's a great question. Look, for us, they get engaged sort of almost now, really. It's something we'll be starting early in the new year. Now, that's not to say we're going to partner the drug in January or February or March, but we start those discussions early, because partnering with big pharma companies can be a long courtship. We want to make sure that we give these companies a long time, a long runway to sort of get familiar with the drugs, get familiar with us, so that when we come to them with data, whether that's sort of late 26, early 27, they already know the story well. They've done a lot of their diligence, and they can act quickly on it. So that discussion starts early. In terms of the kind of transaction we're looking for here, well, there's a million different shapes and sizes to these things. Obviously, a lot of companies focus on the one big deal, to a Pfizer, a GSK, a Novartis. And those deals typically command some tens of millions of US dollars in upfront payments and many hundreds of millions in subsequent payments. But also sometimes companies partner in stages. They might partner, one country or one territory first and then, save the bigger ones for later. We're relatively agnostic to what this looks like. I think we just really want to get the best result for shareholders. But there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and many of our team have been through this journey before. So I think we're open-minded to the possibilities.
Last question. As you say, a busy slide, which indicates the amount of work that will be undertaken over the next couple of years and the importance of that work. But if you had to pull out a couple of key milestones, what should investors be watching for in 26?
I think the most important thing is the startup of our phase 2 study. And so there'll be a number of milestones that sort of represent the operational machinery of that. We'll try and be as transparent as we can with the market. So we'll share with folks where we're going in terms of regulatory submissions, ethics submissions, approvals. And then eventually when we get our first patient in, nothing is more important for a drug development company than doing drug development. In other words, to run clinical trials. And that's what really gets us on the radar. That's what gets people talking about us, and that's what puts us on a clear path towards data and to all the things that flow from that. So I think the milestones and the progress markers that reflect our progression towards a live phase 2 study, those are going to be the most exciting things for investors, and usually significant sources of value.
Thanks, James. A great presentation. Clearly excited about the future, a strong news flow ahead, which investors love. So we watch with interest. James, thanks for your time.
Thanks, David. Thank you.